As interest in the U.S. elections is picking up, we decided to ask a foreign affairs and security analyst with deep grounding on the Asia-Pacific, Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, on the impact of the results of the U.S. elections on ASEAN and the world. I asked specifically about possible repercussions on policies ranging from trade and economy, climate change, human rights, and bilateral relations in the South China Sea. It's a very interesting topic. Let's listen in.
Good morning. Good evening there in Washington, D.C. I would like to introduce to you, welcome to the program, Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, a research fellow at the Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation and a member of the board of directors of the Philippine Association to Chinese Studies. He's also a lecturer at the Chinese Studies program of Ateneo de Manila University. Am I right? And the International Studies Department of De La Salle University. He also obtained his Master's of Laws from Peking University and is presently pursuing his MA International Affairs at American University in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the program, sir.
Good to see you again, Ma'am Alma Angeles, and it's nice to be back. And good morning to your viewers there back home.
Sir, shortly after the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump in January of 2017, Ginsburg acknowledged in an interview with the BBC that we are not experiencing the best of times, but added, quote, I am optimistic in the long run. A great man once said that the true symbol of the United States is not the bald eagle, it is the pendulum. And when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, it will go back. Now, the pendulum of U.S. politics will swing once more today, or in a couple of days, maybe, to us here in the distant Asia-Pacific. The Trump-Biden electoral fight may seem just like a media warfare, but how will the results directly affect Asian economies and political issues? And will this be a geopolitical turning point?
Yeah, certainly. I think it would have serious impact not only on security, but also, as you mentioned, trade, economics, and of course, global governance. And especially in Asia-Pacific, or as some would say, Indo-Pacific, there's the rise of China, there's the rise of emerging economies, and they're looking for ways to try to reform global governance, including on trade, on issues like infrastructure, to try to give more voice to emerging economies. So certainly, countries like China aspire to have more spaces, to perform global leadership roles. Some say that it may come at the expense of the U.S. So this election here in the U.S. would have a lot of impact about U.S. leadership and U.S. position in Asia, and whether that would be maintained and in what form. And how can they negotiate that enduring position given the changing geopolitics and geoeconomics in the region?
Mm-hmm. And given the intensifying economic, technological, and geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China, tensions between the two will continue regardless of who wins the U.S. elections. However, President Trump's protectionist perspective towards China, to quote President Trump, trade wars are good and easy to win. Could Joe Biden's approach towards U.S.-China relations be less volatile?
Well, there is some expectation that Joe Biden's victory may portend a more predictable, a less disruptive foreign policy, a foreign policy that most Asian countries are familiar with, and a U.S. foreign policy that commits more to multilateralism, working with allies and partners, as well as promoting globalization. But of course, a second Trump administration may also have some changes than the previous administration. So I think there is a tendency to portray a different approach when it comes to dealing with Asia, depending on who wins. I think in terms, for instance, in trade, there is some expectation that Trump may prefer more bilateral trade deals with emerging economies in Asia, like perhaps India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Whereas Joe Biden may recommit the United States back to the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that back in 2016, Obama-Biden administration tried to champion and promote. So under this comprehensive and progressive TPP, which is the new version, it's possible that the U.S. may rejoin that trade pact, and more countries in Asia may be attracted towards that. So there's a lot of possibilities, and I think we would know in the coming days whether which road will U.S. take in the next 4 years.
And NAFTA as well, right?
Yeah, certainly. So I think President Trump got some kind of momentum in terms of renegotiating NAFTA to create a new trade compact with Canada and Mexico, which is called the USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is said to be a much better version of the previous NAFTA. So in my view, it can also be his way of telling countries in the Indo-Pacific that I may have some preference over bilateral trade deals, but I am not ruling out entering into multilateral trade deals like this USMCA if we can, go back to the drawing board, maybe renegotiate some of the terms and make it more amenable to all parties, including the U.S.
But how will the U.S. and the world, do you think, will be affected economically if either one wins? How deep or granular do you think?
Well, I think the impact would be big, considering, of course, U.S. position in the global economy, its position in multilateral governance institutions, like the WTO. So any reform of the WTO, any attempts to improve trade governance would have to have the role of the U.S. there. U.S. is still the largest economy, and so where will U.S. put its weight? Whether U.S. will support necessary reforms in global governance to give more participation to emerging economies, especially in Asia. So I think U.S. stewardship, U.S. leadership would still be very essential. Otherwise, global trade governance may enter into a more chaotic period if the U.S. decides to keep to itself and not partake of the attempts to improve or renegotiate global trade governance.
According to Bill Winters, London-based Standard Chartered CEO, even if former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden wins by an overwhelming margin, the U.S. is likely to remain relatively hostile to China. What do we see in terms of economic policy change from either President Trump or Joe Biden?
I think the great power competition between the United States and China will continue. I think it will be the defining feature of the coming years in terms of international affairs. And I think many countries around the world are under no illusion that a Biden victory, for instance, may dissipate that rivalry. I think we may only probably look at which approach or what kind of tact will the Biden administration, for instance, employ in terms of dealing with China. But certainly both candidates have been very strong and tough rhetorically when it comes to portraying China and promising a range of measures that they would put to bear to try to pressure China to improve trade, improve market access to China, protect intellectual property rights, level the playing field, and even improve the human rights situation in China. So I think that the clash between U.S. and China on a wide range of domains, from trade to technology to the South China Sea to human rights issues, I think that is bound to continue. whether the Biden administration will better leverage or use alliances and partnerships to try to put pressure on China, or whether Trump again would resort to sanctions, maybe take more steps to accelerate the decoupling. So those are things that I think we should be looking out in the next few days.
Now let's go to sir, climate change. Climate change, Southeast Asia could potentially face more, as we can see now, no, face more severe consequences because of climate change than other parts of the world, according to the business economic research arm of consulting firm McKinsey. A landmark 2018 report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said the world has only until 2030 to reduce the emissions enough to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid the disastrous climate impacts. Now, the U.S. Has the science, the technology, and the funding to move climate change initiatives forward, and its influence is critical. And Southeast Asian countries are more exposed, as we can see now, to extreme climates and potential climate hazards, relying more on outer work and natural capital, and may have fewer financial means to adapt. What is your opinion on this, sir?
Yeah, certainly. I think climate change will become a major issue going forward. Recently, of course, the Philippines suffered one of the strongest typhoons. I think it's the strongest typhoon this year. So yes. It just passed by the Philippines, leaving so much damage, especially in Bicol, in southern Luzon, and in parts of the Visayas, I think. So that goes to show, how climate change has affected weather patterns, and cycles of monsoons. And at the same time, of course, human-induced activities, human activities contribute a lot to this climate change. In Indonesia, for instance, every year, there's this massive burning of, huge acres of former forest cover to make way for plantations like oil palms. And, this creates a lot of haze that goes as far as Singapore, Malaysia, and of course, even southern Philippines. So climate change is a real concern. And I think the Biden administration, in my view, he already said that he would recommit the United States back to the Paris climate change agreement that the Trump administration in its early days decided to withdraw U.S. from. So I think many countries in Southeast Asia and in the world may welcome such a move to see the U.S. a major power and also a major emitter of industrial gas, contributing to efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think it would be a good sign, and it would be easier to to convince other countries, including in fast emerging economies like in Southeast Asia, if U.S. will be on board.
COVID will be overcome. The climate crisis cannot be overcome unless we have American leadership. That is according to Louis Young, Belize's ambassador to the UN. And President Trump is seen as being pro-business and backing the fossil fuel industry. How will the U.S. elections affect the balance between solving climate change and having a strong economy? Can we both have that?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a tough balancing act to make. Certainly, U.S. Recently just became a major energy producer. And I think there's a very strong domestic lobby for coal and for oil, including for fracking. And that energy lobby is certainly very influential. You mentioned that President Trump is in support of this energy business to make it grow and to help them export surplus energy abroad. So I think liquefied natural gas and LNG, which is more environment friendly compared to oil, may be a next sunshine sector for the U.S. And it's something that I think many countries in Southeast Asia, like Philippines and Vietnam, which is because of our rising economies, our increasing demand for energy, and our inability to harness our offshore energy resources in the West Philippine Sea, we may have to import more of that energy. And I think U.S. is well positioned to meet that growing demand. So I think when it comes to improving the quality, the energy, the environmental friendliness of sources of energy, I think LNG could be a way to go for the future. But at the same time, it still has a carbon footprint, but it's less than oil or coal. I hope to see, of course, more investments on the green energy, like wind and solar. I think former Vice President Biden mentioned about the Green New Deal, how to invest more on this energy sector, this new renewable energy sector, and how can this provide economic opportunities, jobs, and even exports for the U.S. So let's see how things will pan out.
Will another 4 years of Trump impact us here in the Philippines by way of climate change, biodiversity, and how about our bilateral relations with China?
Yeah, so certainly I think our relations with China would come under increasing scrutiny with fresh mandate from the Trump administration. We know that acrimony between the United States and China is increasing across the board on many fields, and South China Sea is certainly one theater where we see this competition between the US and China. So this increasing freedom of navigation operations and exercises on the part of the US Navy is being met by exercises also from the part of the PLA, Navy of China. So the risk of conflict, the risk of miscalculation is becoming more high as these two major powers interact, in the South China Sea. So with the Philippines, a major claimant in the South China Sea, along with Vietnam, Malaysia. So I think the efforts for ASEAN, to fast track the code of conduct in the South China Sea, work it out with China, and probably, hopefully, open it up, to other countries. Factor the interests of other user states or major countries, major maritime powers that also uses the strategic South China Sea, like the U.S. So I think that may help dial down tensions. But at the end of the day, I think it would still be up to U.S. and China how to negotiate, our relations that is becoming increasingly more frictious with the continuous rise of China and the desire of the U.S. to remain a major power in this part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific.
So the fast tracking of the COC is you suggest that this is the way forward, fast tracking the COC.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's one potential way to try to diffuse tensions, especially within the claimants, ASEAN claimant countries like Philippines and Vietnam and Malaysia, and out of China. Of course, we should not be putting all our hopes in this mechanism, but it's certainly one way to build confidence, and it's one way to, if the COC will have a dispute settlement mechanism that would be binding and effective, I think many countries would be interested to accede, and adhere to it, even though they're not direct claimants to the South China Sea.
Now, Joe Biden has courageously put forward his position on a clean energy revolution. How will the fossil fuel industry react to this change of direction? Can a greener economy really provide jobs in the immediate future?
Yeah, I think in one of the debates, between one of the series of presidential debates between the two candidates, this green deal or green energy program has been one sticking point. And I think Biden is trying to argue that in some states, like I think California, they were able to demonstrate that it could work. And this is something that can be expanded throughout the rest of the US, that there is an opportunity with green energy, and it's something sustainable. And maybe in the short run, it may not displace, traditional fuel. It may displace in the transition. It may displace workers, in the petroleum sector, coal and oil. I think the challenge for this intervention, this transition, is to make it less disruptive and ensure that those people that would be displaced because of this transition to the green revolution or the green energy would be absorbed, by jobs and opportunities that the Green Deal or the green energy deal would create.
Can Biden's intermediate goal of ridding the U.S. power sector of carbon pollution by 2035 be achieved without much economic jobs being lost?
I think in the short run, I think in the short run there would be some workers that would be displaced because you have to learn, you have to retool. You have to learn new skills for this green energy, and that may take some time. But I think in the long run, if this program pushes through and it would work as it was envisioned, then it would be good for the U.S. in terms of providing leadership for sustainable energy and living up to its environmental commitments. And also, I think it's a demonstration that this is something feasible, that this project can work and can bring opportunities for the U.S. This could be a template that other developed countries and even developing countries can look up to.
So, what about human rights?
Yeah, certainly. I think that would be a major, a touchy issue, especially in Asia. I think the Trump administration, in its the first term of office, tried to walk the tightrope between cultivating and maintaining, relations with countries that are either non-democratic or increasingly becoming more illiberal, in order to make them on U.S. side, on a coalition, especially in the run-up to the elections. You have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making visits to Southeast Asia, his last stops of which is Indonesia and Vietnam. So I think human rights issue may take a secondary, may become a secondary issue in order to build a coalition, to put pressure on China. Vietnam will play a very important role in that. So I think U.S. under Trump may not highlight the human rights and democracy promotion much, but I think Biden will be different. Biden in the campaign already mentioned that he will usher in a democratic renewal at home and abroad. And I think this may put him in a collision course. Of course, not only with China, but also with other countries that I mentioned that are increasingly becoming more illiberal. Thailand, for instance, there's a growing protest movement there against the monarchy and against the government. In the Philippines, of course, there are groups that continue to criticize the abuses and excesses in the drug war. And of course, in Indonesia, of course, there are also concerns about how the military is becoming influential and how government balances, COVID-19 response and maintaining open society. So I think it would be a challenge for how to keep, relations with countries in the region, but at the same time putting up a very solid position in terms of human rights and democracy promotion for Biden.
So you're in Washington D.C. right now. Now for the disruption of the U.S. and the world is expecting when Trump does not accept an electoral loss, how will this affect global politics? Do you see world leaders interceding for peace and stability in the U.S., or is there a chance that the U.S. military may intercede?
Well, I hope it wouldn't come to that point. Certainly, some rhetoric from President Trump was a bit unhelpful, but I think his recent speeches, he said something about we should not be playing that game. So I think that in a way is a reassuring remark that he will not be looking farther into that for now. But certainly a transition that will not be peaceful will not be good for U.S. domestically, and it will not be good for U.S. image abroad. Many countries look at U.S. as a beacon of democracy, as a country that prides itself with a governance system and an electoral system that allows for smooth transition and a peaceful one. So I think a bad example, a president that may undermine that position will not be good for Washington.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, sir, overall, let's go back to the ASEAN region. ASEAN, you mentioned countries in the ASEAN region. There seems to be parallel movements and disruptions in the body politic of each Southeast Asian country right now. And is this a sign of the pendulum swinging to the far left or to the far right? And how does the U.S. elections turn out how will it affect the ASEAN region?
I think some movements, some civil society or press, student protests, I think they may be emboldened if Biden wins and if Biden walks the talk in terms of standing up strong on human rights and democracy promotion and maintaining that space for expression of dissent. So I think if Biden will hold on to those campaign pledges, then it would be a resounding voice that would not be missed by human rights groups, by student protests or protest movements broadly, not only in Southeast Asia, but also in Hong Kong and in other parts of Asia. So I think that is a development that may take place. If Trump wins, there is a likelihood that these movements may not get the support that they may get from Biden. Trump is trying to keep and maintain relations with governments in the region. And so I think he will not rock the boat too much. He will raise these issues, but probably in more private conversations, but he may not push as hard as Biden.
Mm-hmm. How about, let me add this. How about in the Philippines? We have a very unique body politic here at present, diba? So we do not have a strong opposition party right now.
Yeah. So I think relations between Philippines and the United States would be affected by the results of these elections in the U.S. Of course, in the Philippines, we will have elections in the coming 2 years. So I think the results of these elections may also affect the trajectory of the alliance. Of course, we have disputes with China on the South China Sea, and our alliance with the U.S. has long been seen as a deterrent against incursions on the maritime front. So how do we try to maintain that alliance as a hedge against potential Chinese adventurism in the South China Sea. Of course, this alliance is increasingly under threat because of some rhetoric from President Duterte and some some interest to try to have more agency and to have more say in the direction of the alliance. So I think how this Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, this alliance which has been there since 1951, which has been
Yes.
A cornerstone of our external defense and also of our foreign policy. How will we keep it with the rise of China, with our increasing economic exposure to China, and of course
Yes.
our relations with our other neighbors in ASEAN? So certainly these election results in the U.S. will have a far-reaching impact for Philippines and broadly for Southeast Asia also.
True. Will the Philippines be able to walk the tightrope in relations between the U.S. and China with regards to the South China Sea?
Certainly, I think we should. I think it's an imperative. China is our biggest trade partner. It's an important investor. It's increasingly an important player in our infrastructure. U.S. is our long-standing ally. Is our major security partner. It's a big investor. And so maintaining good relations with these two powers is important. I think as far as the South China Sea is concerned, we made it very clear that our alliance would continue to be a major factor in our security calculus. And I think we would maintain that value of the alliance as a deterrent and also as a platform, as a card, as a negotiating chip when we deal with China on the West Philippine Sea. So we should be able to navigate the tightrope. It's not an option for us, unfortunately. It's an imperative. And it's not unique for us. This is the same predicament for most countries in the region. How do they try to keep relations with these two? We should not be making choices. We should not be taking sides. We should continue to carve our own space and maintain good relations with both. Push back if we have to, but at the end of the day, we should also hope to contribute, in efforts for great powers, to come to terms among themselves, because we can try to do our part to make U.S.-China relations better, but that decision of how to conduct their ties, at the end of the day, those decisions will have to be made by people in Washington and in Beijing. So ASEAN can play a role, probably to mediate, probably to provide an office to, for leaders of both sides to agree, to meet and discuss. But at the end of the day, it's U.S. and China. Their position, their clash in Southeast Asia will have a huge impact for the region, including for the Philippines.
In this day and age, U.S. politics still affects the world and its policies and economies. Please give your message on the world coping with a pandemic, messy politics, corruption, and all the other hindrances to a hopeful 2021.
Yeah, certainly. I think U.S. elections, will may tell how U.S. will play a leadership role for the world, come next year. So again, as you mentioned, the world is facing this unprecedented pandemic, and of course, the world will have to find ways to recover from this. So certainly, for one, I think the search for the cure, the search for the vaccine, the cooperation to develop a vaccine, and making sure that all countries powerful and not, big and small, will have access to this vaccine. It's very important to ensure that it's inclusive, that everyone will get out of this mess that we are in. And of course, at the same time, how to fuel global economic recovery. So leadership of major powers like the US will be very important in charting the direction of the world to get out of this pandemic and to re-energize the globe going forward. So let's hope that the best man win, and let's hope that America will continue to play an important role for not only for Asia but for the world.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your valuable insights on the U.S. elections and the global situation at this point in time. As I usually say, at the end of the day, there is something left to hope for and to be grateful for. Thank you very much, sir.
Always welcome, ma'am.